afternoon and welcome to the Clinic for the Rehabilitation of Wildlife. My name is Rachel Rainbolt and I'm the Education and Outreach Director here for us at Crow. And it's really my pleasure to welcome you here today because it's another episode of Wildlife Wednesday. And today's content is going to feature a little bit about Earth Day, since it's Earth Day today, as well as tips for making a wildlife-friendly landscaping. There will be links listed to some of the content covered this afternoon in the comment section below this video at the end. And also, if you're interested in supporting our team here at Crow, our cause, our staff, and our recovering patients, click on the donate page above the link today. So we'll kind of get into it here. Before we kind of tail into the tips for wildlife-friendly landscaping, I do want to discuss Earth Day because today is not only Earth Day, but it is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And what better way to give tribute to Earth Day than to talk about the inspiring person for Earth Day, which is Rachel Carson's. So Rachel Carson started off her career in the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries as a marine biologist. And in the late 40s, when she was working, she discovered that there were connections between the use of synthetic pesticides as well as interacting with the health of our humans and the health of our environment. And so in the 50s, when she became an author, she started putting together research that would later turn into the work that she is most well known for, being Silent Spring. Silent Spring did discuss the effects of pesticides, particularly DDT, on the birds, hence the name Silent Spring. And because of her efforts, that book inspired the movement Earth Day. In its first few years of publication, Silent Spring sold more than 500,000 copies in more than 24 countries, and it is still used in quite a bit of literature today for reference points. And fast forward a little bit, Silent Springs did become published in September of 1962, when a lot of initiatives were happening in the United States in the 60s. And then in 1969, in Santa Barbara, California, there was a massive oil spill. And this was the third largest currently oil spill in the United States. Now, of the oil spill that occurred, it was estimated that there were about 3 million gallons that was dumped into this area of California, resulting in the deaths of thousands of birds and wildlife off that coast. Now, about that time, there was a junior senator, Senator Gaylord Nelson, who was very proactive about air pollution, water pollution, and he was very motivated to make an environmental initiative to help support these causes. So he enlisted the help of Congressman Pete McCluskey, and the two of these gentlemen worked together to co-chair the first Earth Day, which started in 1969. And it was selected for April 22nd because a lot of the conservation initiatives that were being discussed in the local schools were by students. And so April 22nd was selected at the day because it falls between spring break and the remainder of the academic year. And these gentlemen believed in the power of young people so much that they felt it would draw the most amount of student involvement if they made it for that time. So that's why April 22nd was selected as the official Earth Day. And then that initiative was officially redubbed as Earth Day in 1970, which led us to our first official Earth Day. And now, today celebrates 50 years of Earth Day being one of the most robust environmental conservation initiatives that is still active even today. And this is just a collage of some of the different animals that we treat here at Crow. Since January 1st, we're now at about 1,600 or more patients that have been admitted. So we are still on the rise. Thank you for everybody in our audience today who has supported our cause since then. And because this is an initiative that is both pursued by adults as well as children, I wanted to bring up kind of a homage to Rachel Carson again. Since her work was on pesticides, I wanted to tie that in with an activity that can be done with families while you all are home with the current stay-at-home order. When we're discussing wildlife-friendly landscaping, it is important first to discuss the xeriscaping. So this is going to be applicable not just for people here in Florida, but also people across the United States and even our international listeners. So when someone is landscaping specifically for wildlife, the best way to go about doing that is through xeriscaping, from the root word dry scape. So xeriscaping means that you are utilizing plants and other types of vegetation that are commonly found in that area. And so by utilizing slow-growing, drought-resistant plants, this is actually going to help save you more money in the long run because you won't have to utilize as much water, you won't have to utilize as much fertilizer to keep these plants going in the long run. Once they become established, you will notice them growing and thriving throughout their normal seasonality. Now, tip number one for making a wildlife-friendly landscaping is going to be limiting the amount of lawn that you have in your yards. And I know for hundreds of years, we as American citizens have been told that the best way to have your picturesque lawn was for it to be, with different grasses. And now that we're becoming more environmentally conscientious about our choices, it's actually shown that you can limit the use of lawn through utilizing ground covers. Ground covers serve as a great alternative to grasses. And again, some of them are going to be more sun tolerant and drought tolerant than other types of lawn that you might have to spend a lot of money on the upkeep. Along with limiting the use of lawn, you can also substitute barren areas for islands of vegetation. Islands of vegetation are a great substitute for lawn because they not also take away some of the upkeep, but they also add different hiding areas for our wildlife neighbors. For us here at Crow, one of the main reasons why we get animals here is because of negative human interactions related to habitat destruction. And so if you can increase the habitat size by providing islands of vegetation, it not only helps you, but it helps out our local flora and fauna as well. When you are selecting vegetation and limiting the use of lawn, plant selection is also going to be important. Now, in this photo featured here, we have our zebra longwing butterflies, which are the state butterfly for Florida. And if you would like to attract pollinators or butterflies, you're going to want to include different types of vegetation. Now, what I mean by that is when you have butterflies, we all love the end result of these beautiful flighted creatures, but you not only have to have the nectar plants for the butterfly, but you also have to have the host plants for the caterpillars as they are developing before they become butterflies. So again, whenever you're selecting plants, if you go to your local native plant nursery near you, oftentimes they will make great recommendations on plants that work together as a host plant and a nectar plant. Also, depending on the type of wild animal you are wanting to attract, if you want things like gopher tortoises, which there are plenty of here in the state of Florida, they have been known to eat more than 350 different types of plants. And so in that case, you've got a ton of options to choose from. Tip number 2 is going to be increase vertical layering. Now, what I mean by that is when you are planting, you are going to want to incorporate a combination of trees, bushes, shrubs, and ground cover. Oftentimes, the interaction of different plants might actually increase the chance of survivability with your plants becoming established. So whenever you're doing research on your selection of plants, if you also talk to your local native landscaper, they're going to make recommendations on how much space is going to be needed to take up, how many years it might take to have your plants established. So there's a long checklist to think about. With vertical layering, you are also going to want to take into consideration of spacing. When you are first planting your native vegetation or your Florida-friendly vegetation, you're also going to want to leave an appropriate amount of space for them, because when they're first growing, obviously they're not crowding each other, but as plants become mature, they might outcompete each other for those same resources like sunshine, water, and space. And so thinking about that on the front end will again save you those dollars on the back end. Tip number 3, leaving snags and brush piles. So I know that I'm guilty of, before I started working here at Crow, anytime I had a dead log or tree in my backyard, removing it. And it wasn't until I started getting involved with Crow that I learned all of the beautiful things that snags and dead vegetation can bring to wildlife, particularly during this time of the year with it being nesting season. Now, in this photo featured here is an eastern screech owl. They are an owl that only gets somewhere between 8 to 10 inches tall, full grown, and they are what's known as a cavity nester. So if you tuned in with us last week when we were talking about renesting baby birds, cavity nesters are birds that hide within the holes of trees. And usually when you find cavity nesters, they're going to be in dead or dying trees, not fresh, healthy, growing trees. And so if you come along snags or dead vegetation, oftentimes these are going to be what provides the best homes for these birds. Next tip is going to be providing water sources, so ponds and bird baths. So all living things need water, especially water that is regularly cleaned. So if you have a water source, be sure that you are also partially chlorinating it here and there to make sure that it doesn't collect any bacteria. Wild animals do have the ability, depending on what's wrong with it, to pass on certain bacterial growth, and so to limit that, putting some partially chlorinated water near your water sources like your bird baths and your ponds can help keep it diluted and clean. Planting native vegetation. So I already mentioned this a little bit earlier in our session today, but native vegetation is the best way to landscape for wildlife, because if you are attracting plants that are already found in your area normally, then you will also be attracting those wild animals that you want to see as well. And what's nice is that you don't have to limit yourself in terms of succulents or weeds. There are plenty of Florida vegetation that is very brightly colored and beautiful and exotic looking, so it's just planting native vegetation is going to be your best case scenario for attracting wildlife. Offering bird houses and nest boxes. So again, from last week when you were nesting birds, if you have trees that have fallen over, if you do have to get rid of them, you can upcycle or utilize materials that for a new purpose and create bird boxes. So these bird boxes were made from old trees out on our property that have fallen over. And so also building bird boxes is also a great activity for families at home right now as well. And if you look in the comment section below, we will also post our instructions for how to build an owl box, since it's also owl nesting season right now. There are different types of nests, so we do have our cup nesters, which are going to be predominantly for your songbirds, like your blue jays, your grackles, your cardinals. This is an example of your cavity nester. And then finally we have our platform nesters, which are going to be for more of your larger predatory birds, like your osprey and your eagles. Removing invasive plants. So an invasive species is either a plant or an animal that has been introduced in an area not originally of its home range. And because it is not native, it essentially outcompetes native animals and plants for those resources. And so invasive plants can have a deleterious or really bad effect on your native landscaping. Two really common examples of invasive plants down here in Florida is going to be the Brazilian pepper and the air potato. Along with the invasive animals, be sure that when you are mulching, which mulching is very important to maintain the moisture in your soil, it helps prevent a lot of your plants from drying out, so mulching regularly is important. But be sure when you are mulching that you are using native plant mulch as well, or Florida mulch, because oriental mulches actually encourage the introduction of invasive species like our Brahminy blind snake here. It's been kind of named the flower pot snake because it was believed to be introduced into Florida as a result of exotic mulches. So again, whenever you're doing things, even mulching, try to keep it as locally sourced as you can. Reduce pesticide use. So Rachel Carson said it best. Any types of pesticides are bad. The one that we are going to become most familiar here with at Crow is going to be rodenticide or rat poisoning, but there is also herbicide, which is plant toxins, as well as insecticides. The problem with pesticides, regardless of the type, is that whenever you are putting those out into the environment, you are introducing them to the food chain of other plants and animals. So even though you are not targeting our predatory birds, our ibis, or any of those types of animals, any organism that they interact with that has been affected by that pesticide, herbicide, or rodenticide is going to affect them as well. So when possible, please reduce the use of pesticides. Reduce the effects of pets as well. So cats are going to be one of the #1 killers of birds here in the United States. So best practices for our pet owners is if you have a cat, keep it inside or let it roam in a screened-in lanai where it is not interacting with our wildlife. And if you have a dog, let your dog out in a designated fenced-in space, or if you are out walking your dog, please walk it on a leash. If you happen to be living by our coastal communities, we also have our nesting shorebirds right now, and when you let dogs chase birds at the beach, it takes away very valuable resources that these shorebirds have. So when being pet owners, we want to be responsible stewards of our companion animals. Just make sure that you're giving wildlife and your companion animals the greatest amount of space. And finally, expand the scale of habitat. Again, I also mentioned how habitat loss is going to be the #1 reason as to why we get patients here at Crow. A lot of that is going to be from degradation, so roads, houses, building projects. And so when possible, if you want to join forces with your neighbors or with your communities, you can do group landscaping projects that will inevitably end up creating larger habitat ranges for these wild animals. So thank you for tuning in today for our Wildlife Wednesday webinar. Again, donate at the page at the top of this session to support Crow and our cause. Our e-commerce is now open, so feel free to buy a hat, a t-shirt, or other commemorative Crow goods. Or finally, just continue to follow us here on social media. Thank you so much, and have a good day. Oh, I forgot. We have one final thing. Again, it wouldn't be Wildlife Wednesday without an animal here, and I wanted to bring out one of our great natural forms of pest control. So this is Colonel, pun intended. Colonel is a corn snake. This is a native species of snake that we get here in the state of Florida. Now, Colonel's story is he came into us as a retired breeder snake. So people are able to legally possess certain species of snakes here in Florida. And, malfunction for a second. And Colonel was a breeder snake for about 10 years, so now he is retired here at Crow. And when our Visitor Education Center opens up, he will be on display for you all to see. Again, have a good day.